Now, last week's massive blast obliterated most of the port, killed at least 163 people, and injured 6,000 others. And the political fallout continues. And joining us now to talk more about this is decorated U.S. Army combat veteran, founder of Packham Solutions, and a Mideast analyst, Cory Mills. He's also a NEWSMAX columnist. Thanks for being with us again, Cory. Great to talk to you.
Great to be back, John. Thanks.
All right, so we were going back and forth. This happened last week, and, you know, the video went up. I posted something on Twitter I can't repeat here on TV. You said, you know, you were thinking the same thing. We were both wondering how this could happen. Obviously, it looks suspicious, and now it looks like, for the most part, it's a problem with the Lebanese government and their inability to deal with dangerous chemicals like this. And my next thought, Cory, was how many other ports around the Middle East, or maybe in parts of the world, have stuff like this stored and that we don't know about?
Well, John, I was thinking the exact same thing as you are. Look, Lebanon, since 1975, has continued to be riddled with endemic corruption. And that corruption at the top level deals with General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. You know, Hezbollah has controlled that port. They basically tax the importation that comes in. It helps to fuel and help to fund a lot of their, you know, corrupt practices and the militias that basically is taking place, not just in Lebanon, but now with Kataib Hezbollah, even all the way as far as in Iraq. So the idea that they were unaware that there was over 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate, and the idea that there wasn't potentially more that was involved, you know, that leads me to a glaring question, which is, one, you know, how is it that it so conveniently occurred right before the tribunals, which was going to hear about the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri? The second thing is that knowing that Hezbollah, the political party, which is kind of in a shared power structure in Lebanon, was the one who appointed this cabinet, and there was over 10 different reports by military officials, intelligence officials, port officials about this ammonium nitrate that was being stored there. Why wasn't, you know, Hezbollah or Hassan Nasrallah concerned with it? Is it perhaps that they were utilizing it and sending it out to different locations? We know that 2 weeks ago that there was explosives being placed on the Israeli border, and that many of the Hezbollah operatives were actually, you know, got into a firefight with IDF as they were trying to sneak into Israel. Yeah. So again, I just don't buy in that it's simply, you know, just negligence alone. I think there's a lot more that needs to be looked into this. And when they asked about, you know, in international investigations, both Hassan Diab, the prime minister who's now going to be the caretaker, and Hassan Nasrallah both denied any type of international investigation to go on.
Well, these folks are almost like Carrie Lam in Hong Kong, where they are really basically just figureheads. They're instruments of Hezbollah, more or less. And we've seen these protests, Cory, for a long time, even before this. In Lebanon, people are really frustrated with the influence of Hezbollah in Lebanon now. And the end result, we've seen the protests as a result of this explosion, but this is just the lingering tension that's there, again, because of the influence that Iran and Hezbollah has in Lebanon. Are we going to see a positive change as a result of this, or is the power of Hezbollah too entrenched in Lebanon right now for any real positive silver lining as a result of this tragedy?
Well, sadly, John, I don't see any change whatsoever. You know, this endemic corruption and this continued power struggle between the real government of Lebanon and Hezbollah has existed since 1975. We all know that it's not about the king, but the kingmaker, and that's exactly what Nasrallah is. He's the one that appoints this cabinet. So I don't predict any change to occur. I think they'll continue to play their malign activities abroad, and I think that Nasrallah will take a larger influence with the destabilization and utilization of Iranian proxy militias throughout the Middle East.
It's sad to see this play out, Cory, because Lebanon has been such an important, and Beirut specifically, has been such an important city for the influence of Western ideals and democracy in the Middle East. It was the first place that American troops stepped foot in the Middle East under the Eisenhower administration to intervene there. And we see this city devolving into chaos. And again, you know, we see, again, the danger here, which is what could happen to Israel. You talked about that, and the encroachment on Israel, and the power of Iran in that region.
Yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to the 300,000 people who've lost their homes, the hundreds that were killed, thousands that's been injured. And, you know, it just came at such an untimely, point in Lebanon's history. You know, they were already facing extreme economic struggles. There is concerns and threat of famine. You know, they only make about 10% of the grain that's necessary for the entire country. Over 80% of that grain comes in, and as does all medical stuff with fighting PPE and things like this. in that exact port. So, it's just really unfortunate. My heart goes out to the people of Lebanon, and I'm really hopeful that we can try as an international community to come to some type of agreement to control Hezbollah, to control the Iranian influence in the region, and to finally put together an effective counter-messaging strategy for the propaganda, misinformation, warfare campaigns.
All right, well, let's expand this conversation a little bit more. I'd like to welcome in Dr. Walid Phares, a Middle East expert, a former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor. Walid, great to see you again. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And for the audience at home, people might not know this, but Dr. Phares, you grew up in Lebanon. This is your hometown, essentially. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this, but, you have got to be feeling this frustration. We've talked about this before, and I kind of bemoan the fact we haven't had a chance to talk about Lebanon before with these protests that have been playing out. I just asked Cory if this could maybe spark some real change in that country. The people demand more freedom, more democracy, less influence from Hezbollah. Are we ever going to see that?
Absolutely, this is going to, and it is actually now creating a new benchmark for a movement of change by Lebanese. We see all these demonstrations, not just the engagement with the security forces and the violence that we see on the streets, but actually the population of Beirut, of Lebanon, is up in arms politically. They are petitioning foreign governments, their own government, to do very specific things. Number one, to make sure that Hezbollah's militias and his allies will actually pull out from the port of Beirut, pull out from the airport, because there are concerns also about similar material being dispersed in other locations, including the international airport, and that the international community would assume responsibility. They have petitioned the French president and probably soon the administration to help in maybe forming a multinational observing corps that will be deployed in where the sensitive material could be. So people are very frustrated. You mentioned my own frustration. Well, for the last 1 week, it was very tough on me. I was born and raised in that specific area of Beirut. My father was the lawyer of the port of Beirut, so I know very well the buildings and the areas. But that is the personal perspective. The actually national security perspective for the United States is that this shows that Hezbollah has developed a huge network of missiles, counter missiles, and also of this material in Lebanon.
Yeah, the initial report said this was a fireworks kind of storage facility. But you alluded to, Dr. Phares, something else I talked about with Cory, and we don't know what other ports right now have ammonium nitrate stored in them that Hezbollah might be using for IEDs or other explosive materials in their ongoing battles against the United States and other elements.
2 points quickly here. Number one, other countries, including allies, Germany, allies in Latin America, have discovered that Hezbollah had caches of that same material. So that is one very firm matter. The other matter is that Hezbollah has threatened, along with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, that they will use strategic weaponry system the day they will engage with the United States armed forces in the region. So maybe part of what was happening was storing this material and also fabricating or creating some sort of weapon system, not just, I think the port of Beirut was used to bring in the material and store it to protect it from potential Israeli strikes. We know that there is a big game out there in the region. Israel is intercepting this material and missiles. But this is a great concern because all of Lebanon, practically, most of Lebanon is under the control of Hezbollah. Yeah,
and what happens too often, we had a lot of innocent lives lost in this explosion because of the games that Hezbollah and the Lebanese government were playing here. All right, gentlemen, let's turn our attention now to China as we wrap up this segment here. Last night, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sat down with Sean Spicer here on the network and shared his thoughts on China and who they would like to see in the White House this fall. Take a listen.
Make no mistake, it is the case that the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians, too, are engaged in influence operations here in the United States. We have a responsibility to take down that misinformation, to share with the American people the risks that are connected to that. And it should be unsurprising to anyone that the Chinese Communist Party has seen what we've just talked about for a good long time here. The fundamental shift that President Trump has taken with respect to China no longer tolerating their misbehavior and the risks they're creating to the United States, it shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone that they'd prefer a president that didn't take that approach.
Well, Hezbollah, obviously a huge threat. China, perhaps the biggest threat, I think, right now, Cory. Your assessment on Mike Pompeo's take there?
Well, I think, as always, Secretary Pompeo is spot on. China is by far one of the greatest and largest threats to stabilization within the world. We've seen recently where they've negotiated a $400 billion 25-year deal with Iran, violating U.S. sanctions. We know that we've been under economic and cyber warfare for decades. That's been ignored by the previous administration. We know in 2013 that Hunter Biden's trip with, on Air Force Two with, then Vice President Biden led to a very significant investment by the Chinese bank. Look, there's a lot of different things. My biggest question is, looking at what was taking place with visa fraud for the espionage that was going on in the universities, looking at what was taking place with the rapid burning of, thousands upon thousands of documents within the Houston consulate, looking at the fact that, Nancy Pelosi herself even said that China would prefer Vice President Biden. My question is will they be as strict and stringent on, campaign interference and international influence as they were when they were trying to drum up the Russian collusion, now that it's actually working to their benefits?
Well, it would be nice to ask Joe Biden that question if he were out on a rope line or doing any kind of campaign events where he was exposing himself to questions from the press, but we'll have to wait and see if he ever does that. Cory Mills, great to see you. Dr. Walid Phares, thank you for your time and your insight on this topic. Great to see you both. Thanks so much.